Hello everyone. Today I'm going to teach you how to play chess. It's a basic lesson for beginners, and hopefully at the end of this lesson you'll be able to play chess at a beginner's level and then work your way up to an intermediate level and then an expert level. There are levels in between, but the ultimate is the master. It takes years to get there. We're not going to focus on that, just introductory stuff. The history of chess. Chess is a game of strategy and cunning played by two people. It dates as far back as 1500 years. It is known to have originated in India and spread to Persia, where it was taken to Europe by the Arabs who invaded Persia. And the rest is history. The rules and goals of chess. Goal number one. The goal of chess is to capture or trap your opponent's king. This action is called a checkmate. The white side always makes the first move. Then players move alternately, moving one chess piece at a time. Each chess piece has its own unique movement. A player may use a chess piece to capture their opponent's piece or move to an unclaimed square. A piece is captured by moving to the appropriate square with the legal maneuver and removing the defended piece from play. How to set up your chessboard. You do this by having your board in front of you, and your left side, the end square, should be black, or in other words, your right square, the right side of the square should be white. And it's just saying that when you have the board in front of you, for it to be facing the correct way, that on your left side you should see a black square, and on your right side you should see a white square. The other thing that you're going to know is to set up the pieces. You want to start outwardly and come in with your royal pieces. The front row that you're going to be facing you as your pawns. They're all lined up across. And right behind your pawns, you should have a rook on either side. Right next to your rook, you should have a knight on either side. And then right next to your knight, you should have a bishop on either side. This is the part that is sort of confusing to a lot of people, is the placement of the king and the queen. The white king should be in a black square and vice versa, or either the queen should be on their own color. So if you have set up your outside pieces, then your queen, if she's a dark colored queen, the pieces are normally black and white, then your black queen should sit on a black square. Your white queen should sit on a white square or a light colored square. Or either your king, if he is black, he will sit on a white square, and if he is white, he will sit on a black square. This just shows you a picture of how to set up the board. As you can see from the top, the white side, there are the very back row has a rook in each corner, and then inwardly there are knights on each side, and then further inwardly there are bishops. The queen is white. She is the one with the big crown, and she is also sitting on a white square. As you notice, the white king is sitting on a black square. The front row is all pawns. So there are 8 tiles on either row. First row is pawns, and the second row are your royal pieces. This is the piece is defined. The pawn is the short stubby piece. It is known as the soldier piece. It protects the piece. It kind of goes out forward. The knight is sort of a funny type of piece. It moves in an L shape. The bishop has a diagonal movement, which I will go into all the pieces later. The rook, it looks like a castle, and actually it's something that is a maneuver that is called castling, that helps you to protect your king behind a wall of soldiers, which are the pawns, and also a castle. Your queen is your most powerful piece. It is able to move in every direction, and it's also able to go far lengths, backwards, forward, and diagonally. And your king is the main piece, the one that you're protecting, the one that you are fighting for. So when you have your king on your board, he is only allowed to move one space at a time. He is normally in retreat, and he's rarely in defense. Let's go over to chess pieces. A pawn can only move forward one square at a time in a straight line, except for its first move when capturing another man. So when a pawn first takes off, it has the option to either go up one square or two squares, but always in a straight line, and always in a straight line that it started out on. It cannot deviate from that line. Now, if the pawn wants to combat another piece or to take another piece, then it must do it at an angle. If the pawn moves for the first time in a game, you can have the choice of moving one or two squares forward. When capturing another piece, it moves diagonal one square only. The rook. A rook can move any number of squares forwards, backwards, or sideways, but not diagonally, until it reaches another piece or the edge of the board, which means there is a stopping point. That stopping point is either the piece that it is taking or the board. The board is coming to an end. Or you can stop short of those things, your own, if you know where you want to be at to set up your next move. Chess is a game of strategy, so you want to think moves ahead of where you actually are before your opponent catches you in his strategic plan. The knight is also a very powerful piece. It has the most unusual method of moving. It is the only chess piece that can jump over other men. It moves 3 squares in the shape of an L. So what I normally do is I count 2 up and 1 over. So wherever the knight is sitting at, I count 2 squares up and 1 over, or 2 squares sideways and 1 down, or 2 squares sideways and 1 up. Whichever direction that you're moving, unless that area is blocked off by another piece, maybe if it's your piece or a piece that you cannot take yet because it is defending another, it is being backed up by another defender, then you can move into that position. As 2 squares forward and 1 backward, followed by 1 square sideways, or 2 squares sideways followed by 1 square forward or backward. Although it sounds confusing, the diagram below should help you. A bishop can move any number of squares diagonally, but not forwards and not backwards. The forwards and backwards piece that you want to look for, that's the rook. Do not get it confused with the bishop. They are two entirely different pieces, and they move entirely different. The bishop that starts on the black square will always stay on the black square. The bishop that starts on the white square will always stay on the white square. If you have a bishop and you plan to move diagonally, please note the course of your transition, because you cannot end up on a different color than where you started. You can only move square by square in that line of that same color. The queen is the most powerful piece. Now she can move any number of squares forwards, backwards, sideways, or diagonally until she reaches another piece or the edge of the board. Think of the queen as every piece. She moves like the pawn. She moves like the bishop. She moves like the rook. She does not move like the knight, however, but she can cover the amount of space that the knight could cover. So she can move more than a few squares at a time. This is very powerful for setting up strategic plays. It is powerful for capturing a lot of other powerful pieces, and it is also good for getting a checkmate with a few other pieces at the helm. The major piece, the piece that you are protecting, is the king. The king can only move 1 square in any direction, forwards, backwards, sideways, or diagonally. However, the king must never move to a square where it can be captured. The wording that you're going to get used to when you're playing chess are check and checkmate. Check is when the king is threatened. So when the king has been exposed and he is now up for grabs, you are now alerted by the player that is telling you check, your opponent. He's saying get ready because I'm about to take your king. So now you have to do a maneuver to either protect your king or to move your king. So when you're in check, you are obligated to make a move in the defense of your king or retreat, whichever the action is. You cannot move any other players. You must immediately move from check. You cannot move into check, which means if a piece has a sort of proprietary ownership on a lane, like a rook, if a rook is in a pathway, you cannot move in a pathway of that rook. It is an illegal move, so it cannot be done. And finally, checkmate is when your king has no more options. You are now trapped and or you are out of maneuvers and your king is cornered. Some things to know. To choose who plays first, one player holds a black pawn in one fist and a white pawn in the other fist. The opposing player taps on the fist. They choose one fist. The color of the pawn that is chosen by the opposing player is that player's color for the game. If more than one game is played, they swap colors each game. The player with the white pieces always go first. It's sort of a courtesy thing. I don't know when it started, but it's always been that way. White goes first. Another basic thing to know is you cannot take back a move once a piece has been completed. In fact, according to the chess etiquette, you must move a piece if you touch it. So think hard about your move before you do any type of physical touches, because depending on the player that you play, they might be as serious as you think they are and tell you that you have to move that piece. So you might want to think hard before you make any movements. And sometimes it's okay to think hard with chess. People tend to normally take a long time to gather their thoughts, to clear their mind, to make the best suitable move for them. Players alternate turns to move one piece. The move must be according to the rules in the 2 in point 2 above, which is earlier. A piece cannot jump over another piece. This is not checkers. You cannot jump pieces and take pieces. You're not being crowned a king. There is already a king on the board, and that is who you're defending. The only piece that is allowed to jump, or you can move it into the squares without jumping pieces, is the knight. But they cannot occupy the same square. The knight always ends up on an alternate color than when it started. If you start on a white square with the knight and you do the proper movement, you should now be on a black square. A player can capture an opponent's piece by landing on the square occupied by the opponent's piece. That piece is removed from the board and it is not used for the rest of the game. However, a pawn captures in an unusual move. A pawn captures by moving one square diagonally. This is the only time a pawn does not move straight ahead, and it is the only maneuver in which a pawn can take another opponent's piece. A pawn can take any piece. It is not predicated on pawn versus pawn. A pawn can take a knight. It can take a rook. It can take a queen. You cannot move your king close enough to a pawn because a king cannot move into check. But if somehow it was illegal for a king to move into check, then a pawn could take it because a pawn does not discriminate. It can take any piece. Any piece can take any piece if you play in the right way. Just know that it can only move diagonally when it's taking a piece, and otherwise it only moves in a straight line. It's like a soldier. It cannot deviate from its course. It is destined to make it to the other side of the board so that when it is finally there, it can be switched for another piece. The other pieces depends on the player's discretion. If a pawn is able to move all the way across the board, the opponent's side, this is the opposite side, I'm sorry, it is promoted to another piece, except for a king or another pawn. 99% of the time, people choose a queen. It is the most powerful piece. It does the most, and you can get as many as you can get pawns. down to the other side. It is rare, really rare, for a player to have 9 queens, their original queen and 8 new queens from all the pawns. I don't think this has ever happened, and if it has, it is a very, 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 very good player. If all their pawns make it across the board, if the player's queen has already been captured, the pawn and queen are simply exchanged on the board. Now, when you get to the other side of the board, if you already have another queen, it is likely that you've run out of queens to replace your pawns with. So you now have to act like this pawn is another piece. So when you're moving this piece, please keep note of the choice that you've made to replace your pawn with. If you chose a bishop, then remember that your bishop moves diagonally. If you've chosen a rook, then remember that it can only move backward and forwards, or in other terms, up and down, or sideways and backways. Last thing to know, the aim of chess is to checkmate your opponent's king. A player's king is checkmated when the player cannot move or protect their king, so that it would be captured on the next move. The king is never actually captured in chess. Whenever a king is under threat of being captured, the player must say check. This is something that I talked about earlier. If the king cannot move or be protected, the player says checkmate. That is when you have forced your opponent into a position that they can no longer get out of. They are stuck. People sometimes just throw out the word checkmate and just say mate. I still say checkmate. I think it's kind of classy. If you start to play, I would suggest you get familiar with the terminology before you come up with nicknames for it. Side note, the king cannot move into a checked position. This is something I discussed earlier. A king would not make a suicide attempt on his life, so he would not jump into the line of fire. He would always wait until there was a clear passageway. So he would never sacrifice himself. He is the whole purpose of the game. So that's why it is an illegal movement. I know I said finale, but there are a few more things. Many chess games end in a draw. This occurs when neither player can force a checkmate, such as when each player is left with only their king. Since neither king is allowed to enter a square where they can be mated, it is impossible for either player to get close enough to threaten the other king. Two kings cannot be in the same space because that's a check position. Since two kings can't be in a check position, they can never come close enough. So they always be at least two spaces apart. The space between each king. So basically, that's a stalemate. You just be chasing each other around the board the whole time. And as fun as it is to get that far in a game with there are no pieces but kings, you don't want it to go forever. So that's a stalemate. You have to forfeit and either start over or just call it a draw. And either player can checkmate their opponent. There are no valid moves left. The game is declared a stalemate. This can be a good tactical move for a player who is outnumbered. Now, when you have very few pieces left on the board, and even more so, just a king, you can still get a stalemate. The other player may have enough pieces on his board to keep you running but not trap you. So as long as you can stay out of his line of fire long enough, then that game is going to stalemate. He has to check you within so many moves of having cleared your board or having gotten you in check originally. I just want to thank you for watching. It has been a pleasure teaching you this game. I hope that you enjoy it if you decide to play. Although watching this, you were able to understand how the game of chess is played and won. This tutorial, this video, should further help you along. If you have learned something, I challenge you to find an opponent and go start a war.
Hello everyone. This tutorial will teach you virtually everything you know in order to play a game of chess. What you are looking at now is the initial setup of the board and pieces. This occurs in the beginning of every chess game. The pieces are set up like so at the beginning of every game. First, I want you to take a look at the board. If you look at the bottom of the board, you see the letters A through H. And on the side of the board, you see the numbers 1 through 8. Using both letters and numbers, we can identify the squares on a chessboard. For instance, this square is C4. How do I know the name of this square is C4? Well, if we look to see what file it is on, we see that it is on this file. Underneath the file, there's a C. So that's where we get the C. Then we look for the rank. It is on the 4th rank. So we know that this square is C4. Just like we know this square is E5. It's on the file with an E, and it's on the rank with a 5. This is square E5. Now that we have covered the basics of notation of the board, we will look at exactly how all the pieces move. The piece I've decided to start with is the rook. The rook can move in any of the following directions. Along this vertical, or along this horizontal. Almost like a plus shape. The rook is said to be worth 5 points because of its great options of squares it can move to. Now we will look at the bishop. The bishop also has a great number of squares it can move to, just like the rook. Only it moves in a diagonal.
I just realized that this video is going to run longer if I continue to play this tutorial, so I'm going to stop it there. In the link, you see that the title is Learn How to Play Chess in 15 Minutes. I suggest you look that up on YouTube. It's a great tutorial. I have watched it, and it does explain every single thing that I've gone through, and it wraps it up pretty well. Thank you again, and have a great day.